This has been a year of extraordinary big tech censorship, and I suppose of some loosening of big tech censorship with the rise of Elon Musk and his takeover of Twitter.
It's definitely a game of two halves.
It is.
Because you almost forget because of all the excitement around Elon Musk.
Yeah, so Tom, do you want to take us through some of the things that happened earlier on in the year?
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
That's really,
Because everyone does kind of forget what was happening in February with the truckers and so on, which felt like the beginning of, or at least the hardening of big tech censorship, the reaching of it into more areas of life. Like they could deplatform you, but now they could defund you. So you had GoFundMe, the fundraising platform, deprive the Freedom Convoy, as it was called, against vaccine mandates and so on in Ottawa and elsewhere, of being able to access the money that they themselves had fundraised. Kind of, again, working almost in concert with the Canadian government, which was freezing bank accounts and, extending their terrorist financing laws to affect these truckers who had just turned up, blocked some roads and said, we don't want to go along with these policies. So you had that kind of really frightening extension. We saw, of course, reach into the UK with the PayPal scandals, where you saw groups like the Free Speech Union and Us For Them, and particularly kind of lockdown skeptical organisations, essentially being deprived of their accounts and, by connection, essentially blocking off a significant way in which people would donate to them. I think it was a third of the Free Speech Union's funds were drawn from PayPal accounts on what was quite clearly political grounds. They'd referenced loosely hate speech policies and so on. So the ability of big tech to kind of unperson someone or an organisation was demonstrated with sort of terrifying detail, if you like. But I suppose since then the story has been all about Elon Musk, and I'm sure we'll get more into that. But I think the one thing that's been striking about the response to that, the kind of shock and horror that he has been liberalising things on Twitter to some degree, is that you clearly see that the cultural elite, the liberal left, whatever you want to call them, for all of their naysaying in recent years, they do recognise how powerful a weapon this was and how they were kind of in control of it. And I think that a lot of the hysteria around Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter has sort of demonstrated that in many respects.
And Freddie, one of the most interesting things that Elon Musk has done since his takeover is the so-called Twitter files, releasing these internal documents showing the extent of big tech censorship, so showing the extent of collaboration with the security services and the Democratic Party and things like that. Yeah. Do you want to say a bit about that?
I thought that it's been extremely funny just to watch it and a bit terrifying. Yeah. But I thought the most terrifying, so the first lot of Twitter files were done by a journalist called Matt Taibbi, who's a very good journalist. And they were not disappointing. They were sort of interesting to a certain extent, but they were a bit of a damp squib. They kind of, you sort of thought, oh, well, we knew this happened. Yeah. And you thought, okay, well, we're not getting much here. And then a few days later, there was this supplemental Twitter files where we found out that the files had been vetted by a former general counsel at the FBI, who's now the senior deputy counsel at Twitter. And they'd been, a lot of files had actually been scrubbed. So you realize, you just see quite how hand in glove American intelligence, deep state, if you want to use that word, were with big tech. And the terrifying thing about the response to Musk, for me, is we like to think that there's sort of, the elite and everybody, if they realized what was going on, they'd be outraged. Yeah. But what you actually see is everybody's outraged at Musk for revealing it. Because it ruined Twitter for a lot of dickheads, and it's like deeply depressing.
It's either this is a nothing burger, we knew that anyway.
Yeah, that's the best thing.
Why is he doing this? He's going to spread hate. Simon, what do you make about Musk as a kind of countercultural figure? I mean, he's sort of popped up in actually all of the topics that we've spoken about already. I mean, he's part of the free speech discussion. He was giving sort of Starlink, internet to Ukraine. He
turn on that issue, it's fair to say. He's been red-pilled on many fronts.
Yeah, that's true. But he's also he's a part of the culture wars as well. I mean, what do you make of him as a figure?
Yeah, he's a very interesting figure. He's a bit of a shapeshifter, isn't he? Some of his previous eruptions into public consciousness have been a good deal less heroic than his present mode, like calling the cave divers in Thailand paedophiles because they use his submarine or something. I mean, he's an extraordinary character. That people have put up quite detailed accounts of how he has, to some extent, not exactly risen without trace, but perhaps not been quite as responsible for quite as many of the sort of technological innovations or indeed the sort of great business gambles that you might assume, given that he's become the world's wealthiest man. He's one of those people who's sort of swum with the tide a little bit more than you might think. I've been quite impressed with his openness to the possibility that no possible reform is off the books, that there is nothing he won't consider and play with. You do sometimes feel as if he's reinventing the wheel to an unnecessary extent with Twitter. But I think a lot of people did feel that, the kind of demons that were flushed out of the main building and seen wandering away with their cardboard boxes in their hands was quite an extraordinary exposure. That was a couple of days for the ages. And some of the sort of interviews carried out by the Huffington Post and what have you afterwards with people who were in charge of, human rights within the building and so on, were, exposed to. I agree with you to some extent, Fred, that there was a little bit of a damp squib anticlimax when the Twitter files came out, but I think a lot of all that was to do with the fact that we'd already seen the kind of people who were working there already, and we'd already had our worst suspicions confirmed by that point. I still have faith that he might. This time next year, I think we might have a better, stronger, more coherent, responsible Twitter than we have previously. And I think the main takeaway I've had so far from his ownership of it is that a huge number of the left wing, the journalists, the commentariat who had become quite complacent in their assumption that they were basically running the show and it was aligned with their beliefs and their sentiments and so on, were absolutely horrified with what they thought might emerge under Musk's rule, and I just don't think we've seen that. I don't know what experience other people have had. Possibly they have been trolled more than you would think, but honestly, my experience of Twitter has hardly changed at all. A lot of the old accounts that I followed, who were cancelled one after another since the early 2010s, some of them I was really looking forward to coming back, but they haven't, sadly. Some of the more provocative and risky ones. I just don't think it's. I don't think you can ever quite reclaim the pre-Trump. What people were hoping for was that kind of the Kekistan, the frog era, previous to Donald Trump's election, when people were peppering Twitter with really quite outrageous provocations. We haven't seen a return to that. And actually, I think on the whole, the fact that it is a bit of a damp squib in that regard is probably a good thing. It means there's not going to be an eruption. And I don't want to see all the left-leaning journalists having to migrate to Mastodon or whatever it's called. I think it would be a shame if we lost the town square element of this. That's the one thing we want to restore it to.
Although I do think migrating to Mastodon is a bit like when everyone says they're going to move to Canada if the Republican wins or something like that.
It is interesting, though. I know we've got plenty more to cover, but how as soon as Elon Musk takes over, all of the arguments that were always made as to why big tech censorship was fine just completely evaporate. I mean, not least because there has been some questionable cases of him kicking off certain accounts for allegedly doxing him, which is a whole can of worms we don't really need to get into. But it was interesting that around that whole point, all of the arguments that it's a private company, they can do what they want, and it's just like being banned from your local bar. It doesn't affect how you can act, well, what are you complaining about? All of that has completely evaporated now, which is good in a sense because it has you would hope that it has confronted both sides with the reality that just having a billionaire or a handful of billionaires having just kind of executive autocratic control over a big sphere in which political debate takes place is probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
But as we all know, they'll revert back to type as soon as someone else buys it out.
Can I also just very quickly add that I think we had the best tweet of all time from Musk, which was my pronouns are prosecute Fauci. I just love that. You just read it over and over again.